Hello, you beautiful people. Welcome back to the Long Term Podcast. I'm your host, Advin Villa. Today, we have a senior program coordinator with the Ministry of Advanced Education and my former high school teacher, Justin Gabinet. Everyone, welcome.
Hi, okay. Let's do it.
Yeah. Here with the Justin Gabinet.
That's me.
How's your day?
The day was good. It was busy. Did a lot of reading, a lot of writing. It was a good day, but busy.
Yeah. For all of you that don't know, this was my teacher back at Archbishop Jordan High School, and wow, it's been 5 years ago now since I last
Which is wild. It
graduated.
doesn't feel like 5 years ago.
What inspired you to integrate nutrition and cooking into life preparation courses, and how do you believe it enhances students' overall education?
So I think really good question. I think first and foremost, I think we get caught up in the idea of academia, and for a lot of people that can be, and rightfully so, like the end all be all. I'm a firm believer in teaching holistically. So I've taught academically, I've taught non-academic courses in university, in my education classes. My major was in human ecology, which lends itself to more foods.
Why did you choose human ecology?
Why? Well, I think originally when I was in high school myself, I've always was really passionate about cooking and food, and had a really good relationship with how to cook and stuff like that. But I didn't want to go into becoming a chef. I was like, I need something a little bit more academic. And what ended up happening there was my food teacher was like, you can become a food teacher, right? And I was like, oh, I did. Okay.
That's a route?
That's a route. Didn't know that was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So went to university, went to Grant MacEwan, and then I guess it's now MacEwan. And then just to the U of A, I did 2 years at each. And it was a really cool experience. And in and of itself, kind of going back to my former comment about the teaching holistically, being a human ecology major in secondary education allowed me to take a lot of very interesting courses. So one of my favorite courses was when I got to, it was Classics 363. I can't remember exactly the number, but
Greek mythology?
that's Classics, it's based on that one, but it's a higher level. So it was actually when I got to go and live in Rome.
You lived in Rome?
So I did an exchange program for MacEwan. Yeah, so I was there for about 3 months. I lived in a Polish convent, so I lived with nuns. I had 2 PhDs as my, essentially not tour guides, but like my professors at this course.
That must have just been mind-blowing.
It was really cool, and you got a really, really in-depth version of what Rome is like in Italy and the classical literature and everything. It was such a cool, eye-opening experience, and you got to really not only immerse yourself in ancient Rome, but also the everyday of Rome in and of itself, and it's just such a cool experience, and that really opened my eyes up to a lot of things.
I've really been obsessed about ancient Rome and Marcus Aurelius.
Oh yes,
just his philosophy,
his meditations and everything.
I have his book, and just his ideas on forgiveness, about discipline, about viewing others as just humans, right, for what they are.
Absolutely.
And this is the most powerful person in the world, arguably, at that time.
Ancient Rome. Like I know there's that trend about talking about like how often men think about the Roman Empire, and I was like, I probably think about it way too much because I literally lived in Rome. But Rome and like the classics that they taught there. So much profound, transcendent knowledge that I think people can learn. Like there's a reason why it's classical, is that it is timeless, and there's so many good lessons to pull from it. So like for example, there's an Epictetus quote, who again was a Roman philosopher, or maybe Greek, I can't remember exactly, but it's like he had beautiful just thoughts like food should it's curate ipsum in Latin, which roughly translates is not only take care of yourself, but let thy food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. And there's just something awesome. that kind of goes kind of full circle about why and how I got into teaching nutrition and kids how to cook. And to that end, I would say like seeing kids how to cook is just wild, because so many people come from families or backgrounds where they don't cook, or they don't have any capacity to learn about nutrition. And I'm very blessed in the sense that I get to teach kids and even adults how to make meals. Like we don't necessarily make our own clothes, we don't necessarily build our own cars, but
Yep.
food is the longest relationship you're gonna ever have.
Because you can't live without it.
Exactly.
Food will always be something that you need. I don't know.
need
I
it.
can't picture a world where we don't need food. That would be an awful world.
I wouldn't want to live there.
Yeah.
Food is. There's a quote that I always like to say is "Food is love made visible," and there's a great deal I think of something so transcendent there, and that the idea that everyone, it's one of the things that always unites us is that the idea of food. Everyone at some point is sitting down breaking bread, and in and of itself, I think that's why people should learn how to cook.
And that's how you connect with people. And you had mentioned Epictetus. Is that how you
Epictetus, yeah.
Epictetus.
Yeah.
I've been pronouncing it wrong the whole time.
So Epictetus was like an Epicurean, so that's where you get the idea of that that lingo. But yeah, he had some amazing quotes on food.
Cool. I don't know if it's quite about food, but I repeat the quote that he says, it's wealth is not in having great things, it's in wanting few. And that kind of, to apply that with food, really, when it comes to what to be content, to focus on what you truly need, food's one of them.
Oh, absolutely.
There's all these people with materialism and just wearing designer everything, but food's one of those things where if you treat your body right, if you design energy that is accustomed for your own mind and body, then you're gonna augment every facet of your life because it floods into the interactions that you have with other people, how you feel, how you view the world, the lens that you view it, and it all comes down to your food.
And you hit the nail on the head. It's like food. Name me another thing that can that not necessarily controls, but like our world revolves around on a daily basis.
Yeah.
I'll wait because there's nothing, right? Food is both something that is so interconnected and something that is so important to all of us for different reasons. And going back to your quote about like live simply is like some of the best food you've probably ever had is also the simplest.
Yeah.
Like just like making a loaf of bread, like something if everyone like when you think about freshly baked bread, that's just something.
Especially when you're hungry.
Exactly.
Food just maximizes the dopamine, the satisfaction.
Oh, absolutely.
You go through a fasting period, just the next. It doesn't matter what it is. Anything tastes good, and especially when it's a food that you love.
No, food. I could talk about food for literally hours.
That's awesome. How do you approach teaching nutrition and cooking to students with varying levels of interest and experience in the kitchen?
So another great question. I guess the first thing I always do is I try to make people to be at a similar level. So whether that be lowering or raising the bar, depending, you just gotta start somewhere. And I think in terms of like varying degrees of interest, I've always had a couple kids that in my past that like took foods because they thought it was going to be fun and easy. It's always fun to some degree. Food should be fun. But I've never had people who are just like so over the class because X, Y, or Z. They end up loving the class because I think there's something so cathartic about not only for mental health, but also just like it's teaching a life skill. And again, like we've seen the transmission of knowledge, like especially around COVID, like a lot of people, what did they turn to? Oh, they turned to baking bread and a lot of cooking, and they fell in love with cooking and making their own food. So I think when it comes down to it is people are always going to have varying interest in stuff. As a teacher, I always approach it from a sense of, if I'm bored, then the kids will be bored. If I'm excited, then people will feed on that energy. And I always try to come about it with like, I'm excited about, we gotta make something. You could always be, and I'm always gonna poop on math a little bit, but yeah, you could always be doing math right now, but hey, you're gonna be making a cake. What's more exciting?
No, it's so applicable. It's one of those classes too where people do not skip foods. I just don't hear of it.
They don't. At least in my class, they did. There was always a couple, and I hunted them down when they did. But like a lot of kids that again we know that high school and your academic rigor is so intense, and I think there's going back to the piece about teaching the whole child is like there's something to be said about just taking a class that yes you learn a lot from, but also you get to literally taste what you've made, and not to again badmouth any other subject area, but like, yeah, I'm always a little bit biased because like people are excited about it. Like I'm excited about teaching it.
I've been in one foods class. I wish I had taken more, but you are a part of this community, and you guys work towards an objective. And after that objective is reached, the reward, and that's when you sit down and you eat your own creation. There's such beauty in that because
absolutely
you're working with your friends and there's a head, there's a teacher, and you guys are just the communication part of it, and it's just you don't really need to study as much. It's not, and as you said, it's very cathartic when you see that bread just pop up and come to fruition, and you see the meat that you've diced and minced, and you see the red veggies that you come up, and you make this soup, and it all comes together. It's an artwork.
Oh, 100%.
And then you indulge in it.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I think there's also a piece that, and you kind of hit the nail on the head, is like you're talking when you're taking a foods class, you're not just learning how to cook. You're learning how to communicate. You're learning time management. You're learning budgeting. You're learning. There's a lot more of that we call the hidden curriculum that kids are learning. And I would say kids, but I really mean young adults. Because like when you're cooking with groups, like things can literally get really feisty. Like I've seen fights and I've seen breakups happen in the foods lab. I've seen it all. Like, and again, you're dealing with like essentially like I'm giving pubescent youth knives and fire. What could go wrong?
Yeah.
And part of it is like sometimes there are accidents. Yeah.
Because people, to save money, what do people do? They stop eating out. That's kind of the first thing that always pops up. And what do they need to learn after that? They need to learn how to cook to make it taste good.
Exactly. And in our generation, I'm going to put ourselves in the same generation here a little bit, but a lot of people don't know how to cook, and it's surprisingly like the amount of people that like come in and they have a blank slate when it comes to their ability to cook always amazes me.
Yeah. It's quite terrifying actually, because what are you gonna do if mom's not around? Dad's not around to cook.
Well, there's always Uber Eats, but
Uber Eats, and then if you spend that every night, it racks up.
Very fast. Absolutely.
And not only that, it's not the healthiest for you.
No, and I always jokingly say that food and teaching food and nutrition it's always a combination of like treat yourself and how to look good naked. It's that happy medium where you always have to like have a good relationship with your food. Like growing up, I didn't necessarily have the best relationship with food, and that can be attributed to a lot of different things. But that's also part of the reasons why I went into becoming a foods teacher. Is I got to have a healthier relationship with food, and we're seeing huge things coming out from the pandemic. We're seeing huge body dysmorphia, huge things like mental diagnoses that come out from these, because like what did everyone turn to again during the pandemic or hard times? They turned to food because it's comfort. And like I could just talk ad nauseum about this because I love talking about food.
Me too. It's beautiful, and I actually had Jaden Sanderson. I'm not sure you taught him.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a chef now at I forget which place.
He was. I think he was at Uchilino.
Yeah, Uchilino. Yeah. I had him on the podcast.
That's awesome.
But you had mentioned the kind of the mental illnesses that have come about with the pandemic, and I'm part of it. The food was my escape when there was no one to talk to, when there was just the morale was low, and just to numb the pain of existence.
Yeah, I mean, like again, we were going through a global trauma. Yeah. And so again, what do we turn to when we're hurting in some capacity? Things that were comforting to us. Yeah. For many people, that's food. So like I get it. Like I probably did the exact same thing. Like we always talk about like, people gaining weight during COVID, and it's because we weren't allowed to do anything really, and. Yes, did people start cooking more? Absolutely. But did people probably overindulge in a lot of other things as well? Oh, 100%.
Easy access. You don't have to go anywhere. And that's the easiest thing to do.
Absolutely.
Right? It's just indulge. In what ways do you think learning about nutrition and cooking fosters important life skills and healthy habits among students? And we kind of touched up on this, but elaborate.
I think when it comes to how, like I mentioned earlier, is the food that you consume and have is the longest relationship you're ever going to have. you get to have that very personal relationship with food. And so teaching nutrition, which is the science of food, it is also the looking at it in a kind of the law of averages. So if we're talking about, if we look at like the Canadian Food Guide in the last like 5 years, it's changed. And the reason for that, again, is the science of nutrition has evolved. And so I think there's something to be said about teaching kids about nutrition and doing it in a something called a body neutral language. And again, whenever I teach nutrition, there's always going to be anxiety around those because people automatically think, oh, I'm not healthy or I'm too healthy or whatever. And I always do, there's an amazing article, one of my favorite food people, her name is Julie Van Rosendahl, and highly recommend her. I always say I would want to be Julie when I grow up because she just literally, she just has such a cool ability to write about food. And she wrote an article that I always teach when I teach nutrition, and it's the dangers of, what was it called? The dangers of using the term clean eating. And Julie was a person who was always deemed bigger than what her health, or like her health and her family were always really active, and she was just bigger. And that really affected her mental status a lot, and rightfully so. And that affects so many kids, especially going in high school when your body's changing, going through puberty and whatnot. It makes people very anxious to talk about. So when I talk about nutrition, I always try to use something called body neutral language. So we kind of, as a society, we always are kind of hyper aware, but also kind of ignorant to the language we use around, like, oh, I need to lose weight because X, Y, and Z. I need to do X, Y, and Z to look better. And realistically, yeah, there's definitely something there, but there's also something to be said about, like, hey, your body's going through changes. You are not just your body. There's so much more to you than your size. And there's so much more to unpack there, and like literally they deemed a new neuroses about it. It's like orthorexia, the orthorexia. So I'm sure you've heard of like anorexia and bulimia, of course, but like orthorexia is when you hyperfixate on eating healthy foods and like exercising to the point where it's not healthy anymore. So that's interesting. And then we also, there's a new term, not new, it's not technically.
I had orthorexia then.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. I still kind of a little bit do, but I'm much navigating through it.
I was saying what's healthier, but like in terms of like having a better relationship.
Yeah.
And exercise probably. Well, thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah, no, I with the pandemic and just things that in the family, now we're very solid. We've consolidated, but when things were just at its worst with the pandemic, it was also not a very fun time with my family, let's just say that. And I turned to my health to feel in control, and what ended up happening was I have this image, and I tell everyone that, hey, I'm this healthy guy, I'm this person that goes to the gym all the time, and I eat healthy. But then the compulsion was, I was depriving myself of the foods that everyone else was eating. So I felt left out and I felt suffocated. And I felt, so what I would do is, it was kind of like a bulimia thing too, because I would indulge in all these unhealthy things that I would hide. I would never tell anyone about because I was just very ashamed of it. I would indulge in McDonald's and whatever was in the pantry that was sugary and sweet. And I never opened up to that phase of my life up until last year when I was just talking about vulnerability and I discovered books. But the pattern would be, I'd consume tons and tons of food, let's say during stress periods. Probably 3,000, 4,000 calories. Wow. Yeah. Then I'm a runner. I'd run it all off. So because I couldn't quite expunge it out of my system, so I'd run all of it out. And that's just the reality of it. And I've talked to people, I've opened up to people, and it's a very common problem for body dysmorphia. People have anorexia, bulimia. I know I'm not alone, but I've recovered and I've just gone about it. And I'm very open about it with people because I can provide insight onto how people can find ways to better their lives. And I think part of vulnerability for me is actually it's turned into a strength. Now I don't feel suffocated. I feel like, okay, I went through that. I feel stronger now that I can talk about it and I can be in touch with my emotions. And I view that part of the past as, okay, that happened. but I learned something from it.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's like, it's about you, it was a piece of your story, it's a chapter of your book, but it's not a defining chapter.
Yeah.
And that's always an important thing to talk about. It's because, and again, thank you again for being vulnerable, but I think it's a lot more common, especially amongst young men. I was blessed enough to talk to young men a lot about, they used to do this thing called the Dove Real Beauty Project years ago. And I always ended up talking to women, but there's a severe thing where we don't talk about men. And with the onslaught of like TikTok and social media, so many of those images of the attainable body is not realistic, and a lot of these people who have, like, again, if you think about it, they're oh my gosh, yes. And there's so much to unpack there. And in that same thing, there's also this term that I always like to throw around. It's called, we've talked about eating disorders, but you know, the inverse of that is disordered eating. When you, again, hyperfixate on certain aspects of your meal, like, oh, I want to be naughty and have a piece of cake. And cake is neither good nor bad. It's cake.
And it's that guilt. That guilt you feel. Once you put that in your mouth, how do you feel about that? It tastes good for everyone.
Yeah.
It produces dopamine.
Yeah.
But it's that self-talk. What do you tell yourself when are you calling yourself a loser? You're calling yourself fat in your head?
And hopefully people realize that your body is just one facet of yourself, and that at the end of the day, your body is like not a result of, like, how am I going to phrase this? Your body is, yes, the result of what you put in your body in terms of like food, but at the same time, it's like, you shouldn't be ashamed of eating that cake.
Your body doesn't define who you are.
Exactly.
What I've taken notice is, if you define yourself with something that is just the one thing, it's very linear. As soon as that's taken away, and as soon as that's challenged, it's like your entire being is just out the gutter. And for a lot of people that have body dysmorphia, they define their entire identity with their body. Okay, I'm a guy and I'm jacked, or I'm a girl and I'm very fit and I eat healthy. But they forget that is not the meaning of life. That's your body that can be taken away. It's the connections that you have. It's the passion, the love, the connections that you feel for the everyday reactions. It's the pets, the belly rubs that you get, the TV shows.
100%. The people, the company that you keep. Madame Rock, Joanne, I'm sure you're familiar with her. She has a really good saying, and Joanne and I I have nothing but the biggest respect for her because she's like a mom to me. But she's always says life is about people and about connection. And I completely agree. Life is about people. We don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, so you might as well enjoy today. In 50 years from now, are you going to look back and say, you know what, I really shouldn't have eaten that cake? Probably not.
I wish my body, nobody on a deathbed goes, I wish I had 10 more pounds of muscle. I wish I was 30 pounds lighter. Nobody says that. They go, I wish I talked to my mom more. I wish I hit up old friends. I wish I took more risks. Defining yourself with your body is so vain, and it's such a short-term strategy to live your life.
You don't get to enjoy things.
Because then you're constantly, when you're interacting with people, oh, are they judging my body, or are they doing this? Okay, if they are,
that's more on them than you.
That's more on them. You probably shouldn't be talking to them anyways. They're not true friends. But more people want to be heard. They just want to talk and have a good friendship and have a good laugh. They're not going, this guy is 10 more pounds, this guy's more. Well, it's good to prioritize health.
Oh, absolutely.
It's imperative, because you want to live a life and where your
a long life,
a long life that's very rewarding, that's very fulfilling. You also cannot define yourself over such a vain thing.
Oh, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. And like, there's an author, his name is Michael Pollan, and he's written, I think, like 6 or 7 books. He has a Netflix special called Cooked. Many of my people who are in my foods class, we watch it because he came up with these rules about food. And one of them is, if you can't pronounce the words, don't eat it, which, I mean, fair. I'm always like, sometimes, like, I love a Dorito, I'm going to eat a Dorito. But if you go on to eat, he has a rule that I always kind of like, as my gold standard, is like, if you want, quote unquote, junk food, make it yourself. And the example he uses is cookies. If you want to have 10 cookies, go for it. But don't go to the store and buy it. Go and make it. And this like just the food psychology of simply going and making that food and putting that energy into it, you'll consume less because it's higher quality and you know what you have that agency of what's gone in it. And so in that same vein, like I think that is a really good idea about life, how to not necessarily saying don't eat out all the time. I think you should. We have amazing food scene in Edmonton, and I think you should enjoy that. But I'm also of a huge thing. I'm like, if you can do it and do it better, do it. Cook it.
Mm-hmm. When you add effort into your own creation and you put in thought to the ingredients and you've gathered all the materials, all the ingredients, and you've put in a couple hours and you have this product, you're not going to squander it by just consuming it in minutes. You're going to savor every taste.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's where the beauty of creating anything.
No, you're right. Whether it be art or food or anything, there's 100%.
You're gonna savor this, and if it's food, you're gonna look at the aesthetics. You're gonna the consistency. Because sure, sure, it's great that you've made something and it tastes good, but you're proud of that.
Oh, yeah. And
like, enjoying that.
That goes to, especially just talking about food, it makes me think about like, of course we live in kind of like an affordability crisis right now where like groceries are really expensive. So that's where like my human ecology side. So not only am I a teacher, but I'm also a professional human ecologist. Like technically it's human ecologist or home economist. I prefer human ecologist, but nonetheless we look at that lens, the human ecological lens, is what we look through at how we interact with the daily things of our lives, of humanity. So in my case, it's food. And so what I always like to talk about is not only in talking about human ecology, you want to talk about like food waste and like how to make it. Like, for example, you can make banana bread with the full banana, with the peel. The peel is completely edible. Same thing with lemons and most citrus fruits. As long as they're clean, you can put them in exactly. Yeah. A lot of these things are edible, and a lot of like, for example, like once a week I make chicken stock, and I know that makes me sound super lame, but like I don't buy chicken stock anymore. I never do. Awesome. What I always do is, and again, you don't have to do it on the stovetop either. I just put it like I have my scrap bag of whenever I'm cooking. I have my scraps of like my onions, like all my off things or things that are about to go bad. I freeze it, and then once a week I make stock, and then I have stock for whatever I'm going to make, whether it be pasta, whether it be soups, whether it be biscuits, whatever it might be. But it's there, and I don't know. There's something, again, cathartic about creating food.
Now imagine if you had 10 people doing that. You'd have so much. 100, 1,000, 1,000,000. There's so much food waste.
Oh, huge food waste.
I forget what the statistic is, but if you saved all the food for a week, you'd feed the entire world.
Oh yeah, no, we have the technology and the ability to end child hunger and hunger in general in the world. It's an active choice that we don't. And that is a huge crux. And that, again, going back to it, is like, if you have the agency and you have the ability, and I think that's a key thing here, again, going back to like why I love teaching foods and people how to cook and nutrition, is that they can make such a huge difference by having the ability to cook at home and divert food waste. It's so amazing to me when you see people with the aha moment and they are able to create something for the first time, and then they're like, oh my god, I made this, and it's like, regardless of whether it's a cake or something quote unquote healthy, but nonetheless they get to imbibe it and enjoy it, and it's always one of my favorite things is seeing that final product and see
the joy in their face.
Joy,
I created this. In what ways, or can you share any success stories or examples of students who have benefited from incorporating nutrition and cooking education into their curriculum?
Oh yeah, no, I can say that for like hundreds of my students. You brought up Jaden Sanderson earlier, and I taught him, I believe it was foods 10 and 20, maybe just 20, I can't remember. Sorry, Jaden. But I remember he had to study for foods one time, and he was studying, and he became to be a chef. I was still a bit angry at him for not taking Foods 30, and I do remember that. But nonetheless, he's gone on to do amazing things, and he works at Ucholino, which is by far one of my favorite restaurants in Edmonton. That and Barbarica, which are right next to each other, so shameless plug for that. But nonetheless, I think there's countless things. I've had former students who want to become food teachers and educators. I've had a couple of kids that have gone into food sciences, people who go in to become brewers, all of these things that I'm always I'm always so humbled just to see how far they've come. And so when it comes to teaching food and nutrition, I had kids that come back to me years later and like, oh, Mr. G, I made my own wedding cake. And I was like, oh my God, you're married already? Oh my God, I feel really old. But nonetheless, I'm really excited to see that they do those things and that those skills that I was able to pass on to them were able to impact their life in some form.
It's beautiful that you plant the seed into your students and you come out and you get to see how the tree has
grown,
has just flourished. And it's just so rewarding. It must be so fulfilling.
It is. Like, I mean, kind of like just taking a macro level view of everything. Yeah, you get to see, like, I always, shameless plug about teaching, but teachings are the mother of all professions. And we get to see what our students become. And that's one of the reasons why I love teaching high school is you get to see a lot of people, yourself included, seeing amazing young adults that they become. Yeah. Like, it's so cool to me.
Yeah,
of course.
No, it's, no, we still talk about you a lot.
Oh, thank you.
No, and a lot of people from our school, or my main listeners are from ABJ. So, yeah, guys, this is happening. It's just 5 years, and it's just.
I know it feels weird. Yeah, it was 5 years ago.
What challenges have you faced in teaching these topics, and how have you overcome them?
So in terms of challenges, I think the biggest one is for me as a professional, it's always been like people seeing foods and any kind of option class being like, oh, it's just foods. And that to me is not necessarily, I think that's the biggest kind of nail or dagger through my heart is when people, oh, I need to write an English essay, I need to miss your class. And thankfully, whenever I was teaching foods, that eventually stopped. But when kids come and ask me like, oh, I need to study for this test, can I miss your class? And it's like, well, no, and let me explain why. In terms of like, if you don't know your lines for a play, are you just going to go up to the play and just stand there? It's kind of the same thing when it comes to be like foods in a way is performance performance assessment in a couple areas, and so that's always been like the biggest dagger in my heart when people like choose to like either drop my class or when they choose to not come. And I realize like I understand people have busy lives. I get that. But when you put so much of your life and day, because there's a lot of unpaid hours that people see. Like when I was teaching foods full time, I get up at between 5:30. I get ready, then I go to the grocery store. I make sure, and I'm a pretty crazy person when it comes to produce, so I make sure the produce is the best for my students. And I always have to balance between like cost effectiveness with my recipes, but also like I want to do it. And like when, for example, whenever there was like some sort of event happening or whatever, I have to assume that all my students are going to be there. And so let's say 3 or 5 kids don't show up. Well, that's huge food waste. And so that was always really aggravating for me as a teacher when I'm like, well, I spent all this of my time that I don't get paid for. I do it before school or after school. I don't get a lot of prep time to be able to do that. So I was very frank with my students when they were doing that, and they changed the tune pretty fast.
Yeah. You put in all that effort to buying the ingredients, to making sure everybody gets the amounts. You're making sure that the spoons, the forks,
all of it,
it's clean. You're putting in all these overtime hours without any pay. And when a person just goes up to you and goes, hey, I need to study for my math 30-1,
which kind of for the record, I get it. But at the same time, it's like a huge like, whoa, okay, I guess I'm not, and it's not necessarily taking it personally, but it's just like, okay, well, like I don't think you understand how much time it takes to do all this.
Exactly.
And like not to mention just myself, but also like your group, because again, foods classes are usually in groups. So it's not only letting me down, it's also letting
your team, your team there, and your teacher, culture in a building. So how do you define and cultivate a positive and inclusive culture within your educational environment?
So the first thing I would say is this is just necessarily educational. It can be literally any building, whether it be a job place, corporate building, or whatever. But culture is a positive and engaging space in which you want people to be seen, heard, and valued. And that's the biggest, I think, 3. But in addition to that, creating a culture and creating leadership, cultivating a team, if you will, is you want to get people to line up and not just stand there and say, hey, you need to line up. You want to convince people to want to line up. And the reason why I say that is I think it all comes down to culture. So creating a space and anything about culture is about creating things and celebrating the small things. For example, like at ABJ, I was really big on all the small things, whether it be a Valentine's Day thing, Shakespeare's birthday, all those things.
Yeah,
Halloween,
right
I love it. Like, it's because you want to celebrate it and you want to create those memories. In 20 years, you're not going to necessarily remember what you do in school, what you learned in a certain class, but you are going to remember the pep rallies, the celebrations, the Shakespeare's birthday, or whatever it might be. So when it comes to creating an inclusive space, is that everyone is welcome. There's always when I was ever at, regardless of whatever school I was at, there's always something called, I can't remember what it was called, but I think it was called a cathedral welcome, and it was based off of I think it was an Anglican denomination, but nonetheless they have a list and they talk about like regardless if you're X, Y, or Z, you are welcome here, and that's what I've really tried and always tried to emulate. Is that at the end of the day, regardless of whether you're religious, not religious, spiritual, whatever faith you might come from, whatever belief system you have, whatever creed, code, color, whatever that might be, you should feel safe and seen and heard. And so by cultivating that, I think people are more willing, as soon as you get that safety piece and that seen piece, people are more willing to invest in who they're with and what they're celebrating.
Mm-hmm. When you walk into a culture where everybody listens to each other and there's no barriers, you are you, and everybody accepts you for who you are, and that's when you can become your happiest. You can
Absolutely
become purposeful, and you can go about the world with a lens of positivity, agency, and gratitude. And you've had done a very good job of cultivating that in your classes and in just the person who you've become. And has that like taken some work? Was it, did you always have that, or
I think in terms of, I think there's also there's like the teacher side of me, but there's also the real, like, not to say that my teaching self wasn't necessarily real, but when I was still teaching leadership, I still had a lot of family issues. So I know we're going to be touching on this topic later, but when I was 26, when I was in, I think it was like 2016, that's when my mom, she was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. We changed her levels of care, and unfortunately she passed away that year. It's okay, like death is a part of life and it does suck. However, I think there's you don't know what people are going through. You can always see the thing that they are in that moment, but you don't really know what's going on in their head. And again, empathy is so important in any fact of life, is that you always want to lead with empathy. And for me, I've always tried to do that. I mean, did I have my angsty teenage years and my rebellious early 20s? Absolutely. Where you don't really care. No, I shouldn't say necessarily you don't care, but psychologically and developmentally, you should be at that stage where you're just thinking about yourself. Is it the best quality that we have as humans? Probably not. But nonetheless, you want to really be able to lead with empathy. And what I really like to see is over the last, like, I would say 10, 15 years, I've seen a huge amount of empathy growth, more or less, in the general population, especially the younger groups. You see a lot of empathy, and that comes down to like how you create a culture and how you cultivate that.
Yeah, there's so many people out there and they have a smile on their face and they go about the world, and you on the outside, you think nothing's wrong. They show up to class, they are very friendly. They do their work, they're just one of the popular kids, let's just say. But internally, you don't know whether their father is dying, whether they have insecurities, body dysmorphia, and all these negativity in their head, whether they are so fixated on the one part of their face that they can't show this at a certain angle. And empathy, as you mentioned, is very powerful. And that's kind of where I've been liberated in a way as well. Not fully liberated. I'm not happy all the time, and I think that's a part of life too, where you gotta accept the bad.
You have to roll with it. Life is all about the ups and downs, and like in any of those, yes, you can have empathy, but at the same time, I think there's no such thing as being happy all the time. You can, generally speaking, be like overtly happy over a period of time, but of course life is going to throw you curveballs, and it's I think happiness is being content with where you are and what you have with what you have. And I mean, yes, there's a piece you can always say about pushing yourself to be better, and absolutely 1,000%. However, there's also the pieces of like, you know what, you also need to say like, hey, you know what, I am good enough. Whatever stage I'm at, like I'm good. And to kind of like circle back to the main question though, is in terms of like, have I always been this way in terms of empathy? No, I think empathy is kind of forged. It's done through, it is innate, of course, in humanity, but like it has to be fostered.
Sharpened.
And it has to be honed, right? It has to be sharpened. And that takes work. It's like a muscle. You have to work at it, otherwise it atrophies.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the big thing is it is practicing that empathetic and that like that respect that all humans have innately.
Yeah. When you view another person as someone that's on your team, and when they're on your team, you want to help them, and they do the same for you, you have a lens in the world where, hey, I go through a debilitating issue, I go through something in my family where it's just so unbearable, but a shared joy is double joy, and a shared sorrow is half a sorrow.
Absolutely.
When you have your friends to lean on, when you have your family members who actually truly understand and accept you for who you are, the world seems so much lighter.
And brighter.
Yeah, and brighter. And then you view people and you focus on the good and you want to help. Because I don't think a human being at their healthiest wants to resent people, wants anger, wants negativity. No, everybody wants to be positive. Everybody wants to be accepted.
And it takes a while. And like you sometimes have to rewrite those neural pathways. I would say it's interesting, like looking back, in 2016. So when my mom got sick and died, that is when I started my therapy journey. And I've been in like intense therapy for, since then. So I've been in it for like 8-9 years now. And doing therapy, I was able to find the therapist that was right for me and do a therapy journey. So I do a specific type of therapy called EMDR, and it has changed my mental status so much. And I think even talking about a culture, creating a culture and space where you are confident enough or feel safe enough, where you can actually open up about talking about therapy, because for whatever reason, people feel ashamed to talk about like, oh, I need to be.
I've had like 5 people to open about their therapies on here, and it's beautiful to see that it's becoming normalized and more people are doing it, to be able to control the emotions that they've been stuffing down, to be able to navigate life.
You have to name it to tame it.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite lessons I've ever learned in my therapy journey was something that my therapist told me is there's no such thing as diminishing amount of love. So love is not something that diminishes over time. Love is a constant in terms of like there's no, if you look at a jar, it's always going to be filled, and there's always going to be. I love it. I actually have it written on like a signboard at my condo, and I honestly I have not changed it in like 6 years, because it means love is not a diminishing value, and I think that's one of the most important lessons I've ever learned.
Love is the answer.
Yes, lead with love.
Yeah, for people who have been loved, and I have met some people who have not experienced much. Love is such a. It's not even happiness, nor is it just I can't quite explain it, but it's so freeing to
100%.
be able to say, hey, my mom loves me, truly, no matter what happens, my mom loves me, and no amount of money, no amount of wealth, status
will change that.
Yeah.
Well, the ancient Greeks, they actually defined love in 7 different ways. Are you familiar with that at all?
I've heard of it, but I don't
let's see if I can remember it. Ooh, sure. Agape, philia, mania, storge, pragma, ludus, eros. Oh, I got it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the Greeks did is they kind of broke love down into the different types of love. So agape is the kind of love that, like, parental love. It's that love that people again refer to, the type of love that God has for us. Yeah. So the idea that it's unyielding, it's uncompromising, it's just constant. So that I love that.
I think that's the best type of love.
Oh, agreed.
I'd say, yeah.
Then we have like philia, which is like familial love, or friendship love. Eros, which is like the sexual desire piece. Mania, which is like obsessive love. Ludus, which is like the game playing love. Pragma, which is I call it shopping list love. So like you must be X, Y, and Z to be loved. Oh gosh, pragma, ludus. I can't remember the other ones, but nonetheless, what I like about what they did is they broke it down to more comprehensible bite-sized pieces, and it defines it a little bit better, so that when you're talking about love, it kind of makes a little bit more sense, at least for me.
just it's crazy how many ideas come out of love.
Oh,
and
100%.
literally 7 types. Like
Of love, right?
yeah, yeah. And um, how do you, or can you share examples of how culture impacts student engagement, motivation, and overall academic success?
Oh yeah, no. If kids, to nip this one right in the bud, if kids feel seen, heard, and safe, they are willing to do stupid things. And when I say stupid things, I say like the T-shirt days. And I say that tongue in cheek in the sense that, where else in the world do you dress up in a I don't know, an ugly Christmas sweater? I realize that's more common now, but like 10, 15 years ago, like having an ugly sweater day, like that would be like so hard to get people to buy into. But if you have a culture where people all dress up and they do the silly things, not about living in, not caring about themselves and caring more so about like the everyone, it's the we over the me, people will be more willing to go the extra mile. So in terms of like my thing is like I think it's so stupid that I keep bringing it up, but Shakespeare's birthday was my thing.
You celebrate it every year.
I celebrated it every year, and
Yeah.
my favorite thing was I actually learned about that and Shakespeare's birthday when I was in high school. And so Miss Franchik, who's now a teacher at ABJ, she was my grade 10 English teacher, and it was really cool to have her as one of my colleagues now. But her and my other English teacher, Miss Burak, they really cultivated a love for Shakespeare, and like they celebrated Shakespeare's birthday. And so as in like the highest form of flattery is invitation, I was like, I need to bring this to ABJ.
That's incredible.
And so I did put it all on little steroids, but like yeah, no, their ideas that really impacted me so that I wanted to bring it to ABJ, and like I was so happy that it caught on for so many years. I don't think it's celebrated anymore, but which is a little bit sad. But nonetheless, it's something to be celebrated. And like if you can celebrate stuff like that, who's to say like what else couldn't be celebrated? And within that, if people buy into it, then they're more willing to like just create more positive culture.
It's fascinating to witness a person that is passionate about something, of a person that died. When was Shakespeare?
450, 460, 450. How many?
Yeah. Your passion just created a day in which everybody came together and celebrated this one piece. There's little events and little costumes that you made.
It was fun, right?
Yeah, it's fun, and that makes people feel motivated to be able to go home and actually do their math homework. Because hey, that was pretty cool. I want to keep doing that. I want to one day host my own thing. So in turn, that being accepted, being part of that culture, building that actually facilitates other endeavors.
Oh yeah, there's a huge ripple effect.
Yeah.
Like in terms of like moving on from Shakespeare's birthday, like I always like to say, if you're excited about something and if you show that you're not too cool to dress up, then kids will do so as well. And within that, then they will feel more seen and heard, and you'll have more of a culture.
I dress up every Halloween.
Oh, me too.
There's never.
I think we kind of discussed it off camera, but the piece of like if you feel as though you belong in a culture, whether that be a corporate culture or a school culture, people will be more willing to go the extra mile. And so creating a collaborative space for kids and kind of like showing people how to do it. Like, and again, it's simple sometimes as wearing a shirt or doing like the costumes or whatever. If you model that to people, people are more likely to feel kind of put down their prickles and be like, hey, you know what, like I can do this too. And then within that, the kind of like the ripple effect of that is it goes into their everyday life. Hey, you know what, I don't take myself too seriously. I'm going to take a shot at this. And that has just huge compounding effects in everyday life.
People, you had mentioned that people embody this, the costume and just being part of the community. And when people experience failure, they view that as something that's a part of their identity, and they view that as something that's final. But I believe it's actually formative.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, like it's just a step for you to learn. It's just one of those things where it's imperative. It's part of who you're gonna be.
Well, we're all gonna fail. Like, it's like it's one of those things that are always gonna happen. We don't like it that we're gonna fail. We try to avoid it at all costs because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But failure, as I always like to jokingly call it, is it's a first attempt in learning. And hey, you know what? If you're failing at something, that means you're gonna learn from it. So like whether it be, again, like it can be literally anything that you have failed in. I specifically remember like when I when I was in high school and in university. I'll do the university one because it's more recent. But I had a really interesting English prof, and she did not like how I wrote, and she did not like how I was doing a lot of things. And of course, in university, you kind of have to play the game, so you have to change your styles, whatnot. But I went to see her. In like her office hours one time, and she was like, "You're not a very good writer, are you, Justin?" And I was like, "Ma'am, sorry, what?"
Sorry, excuse me.
Say again. And so what ended up happening is I graduated with like not quite honors, but pretty dang close. And I always look back at that and was like, if I look back and just focused on that one moment of failure, I would never grow. And I'm going to use like a little leadership adage that I'm sure some people remember is like a comfort zone is a beautiful thing, which is why we don't like to fail, because it's comfortable to not fail. But if we don't ever exit out of our comfort zone, we never grow. And the best places you can be is out of your comfort zone, whether it be, I don't know, starting a podcast, whether it be, I don't know, like changing careers, whatever that might be. And failure looks different on different people in different ways, but nonetheless, is if you're not willing to take that risk and that jump, then you're going to kind of be stuck.
True. It's that I was listening to this other podcast, and the guy who's a Navy SEAL, his name's Mr. Ball, and he does like little stories on YouTube. Very successful guy. He's got 8 million subscribers now, and he says that the times in his life, and this is coming from a very successful guy, he's gone through many trials and tribulations, are the greatest points in his life were the times where he was so uncomfortable before, and actually doing it, the fulfillment is just exponential.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. Where you don't want to do it. No, that's where you got to do it.
Exactly. Yeah. If it feels icky and uncomfortable, that means like you need to lean into that a little bit more.
Yeah. And of course, if it's actually a healthy.
For sure. Like, let's preface that with, of course, like if you're doing some pretty reckless things, then that's a different story.
If you're drinking and just doing stupid stuff, then don't do that.
Yeah,
but if you're, maybe you want to try up skydiving, or you want to write that task.
Oh yeah, exactly. If you want to try that, try that thing that really pushes your comfort zone. Like back in my younger days, I loved jumping off of cliffs. Fun fact.
Wow.
Not necessarily the highest cliffs, but like into water. Clearly, loved it. And would I do it now? Probably not. But was I scared shitless when I was there?
Yeah.
Doing it? Yeah. But again, I overcame that.
That's awesome. How do you incorporate diverse perspectives and experiences into the cultural fabric of your educational institution?
Ooh, good question. I think there's, in terms of including other cultures within a culture, it is very delicate balance, of course, but I think the thing that needs to be remembered in all of that is being human and authentic. The moment it becomes performative is the moment people are kind of tuning out. If people, like young people, especially young adults, young humans in general, they have BS detectors, and they can tell when people are being authentic and inauthentic. And as soon as it becomes kind of like performative rather than authentic, there is something to be said about people just completely disconnecting, because they're like, it's not real. And I don't want to be in a space and be vulnerable when it's not real. So I think it is a really important thing to be cognizant and be authentic about. Like, for example, I'll do that. One of the things at work recently was I'm part of a diversity, equity, and inclusion group at my current job. And one of the things we were doing is we always like have a list of days of celebrations for multitudes of different faiths. And I asked the question, I was like, well, why didn't we get an email about Ramadan? Like, so many of our employees are Muslim. Like, why are we not supporting this? And like, again, I'm raised up like Ukrainian Catholic. Like I have no real like tell in terms of like Ramadan, but like I think it's important for other people and other cultures to be celebrated and a shout out to given to them. And so I guess for me, it's adding a voice, because I have that privilege and that voice that I can give, that I want to empower others to be able to do it. So in terms of like the educational school culture, I think it is of the utmost importance that people honor other viewpoints and other lenses and other experiences, and in a way celebrate them and acknowledge them. And um, because if you do that, the culture will be healthy. As soon as it becomes toxic, and it's unfortunate, it kind of has to be proactive, or it's going to be kind of like, if it's not proactive, then you have to kind of like step back and you really have to do kind of like letting the swamp drain and kind of like adding new things back. But you have to be very mindful and you have to be smart about it. And again, as soon as it becomes performative, that's where you run into issues.
Yeah, truly understanding other people just for them, and the understanding that, oh, this is what they were raised with and this is kind of what's important to them, and to bring that to light and to recognize that, hey, this is a group of people that we're neglecting, not purposely, but a person that should be recognized.
Yeah.
That everyone is equal definitely brings such a fulfilling and such an accepted environment. Going back to culture, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and I think there's something that I learned from my younger years at university is a little bit morbid, but like, in life we all smell different, in death we all smell the same. And I don't think that is necessarily a dark thing. I think in the terms of like, hey, just because we all come from different backgrounds, different creeds, colors, codes, whatever, I think there's something there to be said about like, we're all human. And at the end of the day, we're all human. We shouldn't be looking at our differences. We should be looking at more of like, what makes us human.
Yeah. Instead of dividing, why don't we connect more?
And absolutely, build a longer table, not a higher fence.
Yeah. Yeah. What strategies do you use to address and mitigate the conflicts and tensions that may arise within the cultural dynamics of the school? Because there are a lot of kids that separate themselves. Oh, I won't hang out with the hockey boy because I'm in with the robotics, and the girls, oh, I'm not with the soccer girls and with the volleyball girls, and that can cause fights. And even with the race, and a lot of people like to hang out with people that are like them, and they like to alienate other people.
And I think that goes back to a piece of culture. So in the educational world, it's called siloing. So if people are just fitting into their one silo and not interacting, to me, that's a broken culture. And that needs to be like, hey, what can we address holistically to make people be invested, seen, heard, and feel safe? Because as soon as you start seeing in an educational setting, or even like a real, like a quote unquote real life job, but as soon as you start seeing those kind of symptoms, there's a bigger issue. And so you need to step back and say, hey, these people are feeling this way. How can we make them feel as though they're seen, heard, and celebrated? And it always breaks my heart when I ever hear like kids saying, oh yeah, in high school or in my experience, I was called this slur word or whatever. And that should not be happening anywhere.
Of course not.
And it goes to show you, like, societally, like, I feel like there's an intense polarization about a lot of things. And I'm going to go back to what I said. At the end of the day, we all smell the same in death, and in life we all smell different. And in those points, you need to make sure you address it. And I do it by, like, probably not necessarily the healthiest way, but I call it out. Because if you see it, you have to name it to tame it. And so in doing so, you have to say, like, hey, that's not okay.
Yeah.
You can't do that. And making sure that culturally, everyone knows in that space, that building, office building or a school, that it is not acceptable to do that there.
Of course. And you can't recognize a skeleton from, like, you just can't. After you die,
you cannot tell what race it is, you cannot tell what religion it was.
Yeah. So why do people, why is it still a constant problem, right? Just because they're black, they're Asian, white, just Jewish.
Hate is a learned thing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think because of the intense polarization people are experiencing, there is a constant riling up. And when people are riled up, they're more likely to lash out. And I think there's something to be said about, like, again, you need to build a longer table, not a higher fence.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, if I had a quick and easy answer to that question, I think we'd all be billionaires.
Yeah, and that's, I'm also going to add that in the negative side of culture building is you can build a culture rooted in hate.
Oh, yeah. 100% you can.
Yeah, and it's truly awful when people gather together
to celebrate
and alienate. To produce hate in the world and to destroy, because it takes so long to build relationships, to look at the buildings. It takes so long, years of manpower and work.
Oh yeah.
But then it takes just 10 seconds of bomb, boom.
Yeah,
everything
it's
you worked
just
for. Yeah.
I think
Okay.
there's so much there's so much polarization about things and topics,
Yeah.
and people need to again lead with empathy. And at the end of the day, like you don't know what people or cultures are going through. So like again, calling it out not necessarily doesn't always have to necessarily be the most respectful way, but I think I'm just going to go back to what I said earlier: is build a longer table. I think there's so much more to be said. Like I have very different opinions about certain things than my sister, and we were raised in the same household. However, we can say, yeah, we can have a political debate or any type of debate for that matter, but we can still sit down at the same table and say, you know what, I love you, and just because you have this opinion doesn't mean I hate you.
At the end of the day, there's still love. I got so many friends that are on like the complete other side of the political spectrum that we would get into arguments with. But at the end of the day, the love is still there. It's not like you're trying to kill people. You're just trying to go about in the world, and maybe it's like in today's day and age, especially in Canada, it's like both parties they're trying to do good, right? If you look at the intentions.
Oh, the intentions?
Yeah, the intentions are all there, but the acts, they're not so good.
I'm a firm believer in like put your money where your mouth is in the terms of, you know what, if you're gonna walk the walk, you gotta talk the talk.
Yeah.
And if those are misaligned, that's when you get negative culture.
Yeah, that's how it is. Yeah, that's pretty much it for all of culture building.
Are you on to the last one?
Yeah, let's talk about death and grief.
I love it.
What inspired you to include lessons about death and grief in your curriculum, and how do you approach teaching to these sensitive topics to students? And I'd add that I do remember you teaching Leadership 9 with our class, and it still stuck with me. You talked about vulnerability. That's kind of one of the first times a teacher has done that.
Really?
Yeah. I guess there were some points in elementary, don't really remember it, but it wasn't really as raw as kind of how you talked about your story with your mom. And the students were all shocked. We'd all look at each other because people are usually on their phones, they look around. But when you gave the speech you did, then I forget how you implemented that, but it was just so on time. Like it was, a lot of people needed that.
I think the lesson you were talking about, I want to say it was the level 1, 2, or 3 activity where I would get anonymous like levels and post them. I think that's what you're referring to. At the end of the day, I think there's something people know when you're being authentic. And so in terms of my story is death. If you were to ask me 5 years ago, would you be an advocate for talking about death openly? Probably not. Yeah. Over the last 10 years, I've lost all my parents. So I lost my stepmom, Maureen, when I was 21. I lost my mom when I was 26. And then I unfortunately lost my dad during COVID. He died of cancer. So I've lost a lot of parents. But within that, I think two things is their lessons about life and the experiences that they lived by have helped me become who I am. And so I always talk about death because people shy away from it because it's so uncomfortable. And at the end of the day, we're all going to die. No matter how much we try to fight it, we're all going to die.
Memento mori.
Memento mori, exactly. We're all going to die. I actually have it Memento mori tattooed.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Oh, that's awesome.
This one. Yeah, it's like a little hourglass. It's my Memento mori. Yeah. So, nonetheless, I think talking about death and grief is really important because it humanizes people. And I, as a teacher, I always like to bring up those things because death is one of those things that people weirdly still respect no matter what. I remember specifically the year my mom died. We were doing what was back then known as geomere, and I came back literally the day after my mom died. And I'd taken a week before, and we were leading into Christmas break, so I was like, oh, I need to just get away from my family for a little bit. So I went into school against my better judgment, and I just remember, I mean, this was like December, let's say 19th, 20th, and it was the point where like everyone was really getting excited for the holidays, and I came in and we were doing this huge geomere project, and I just remember the kids were being such dicks, and I was like, guys, my mom died yesterday. I came back for you guys. What's going on?
Everybody was probably just like, whoa.
Yeah, I lined it up there pretty quick. But like, let me tell you, like, it was I still remember that because I was like, oh, I really just did that. And it's
Did
not
it feel cathartic?
in a way, but it was also like, guys, like, what the heck are you doing?
Probably authenticity, going back to that.
Yeah,
vulnerability,
you hit the nail on the head. I think when people are talking about things that are really authentic to them and they are authentic about it, then people will listen. And I mean, I love talking about death. I've done a lot of grief work, clearly. I've also done a lot of death work. There's a really great YouTube channel out there called Ask Mortician. There's a really great death author that runs it. Her name's Caitlin Dowdy, and she does a lot of talking about like death questions. And I guess in a roundabout way, how I got talking about that stuff was there was something, an event that we hosted at the school after hours. It was called like an unconference, and people got to, students included, that we invited, they got to post notes on topics, on all kinds of topics. They got to give their opinions. And one of them was, I wish my teachers would talk about death. Because, and I was like, oh, interesting. And then so I brought that up to one of my classes, and they're like, yeah, we would actually like to know about it. Because no one ever teaches you what to expect. And I was like, you make a good point. So I kind of worked the curriculum a little bit in that I was able to input it here and there. And we had some really good conversations. Not only about death and grief, but also like the decom process of a human being, which sounds morbid looking back, but I think those are important things to learn. Because again, we're all going to die, and we need to understand, hey, you know what, these need to be kind of in place for it. And in my experience, I think I'm kind of a little bit of a death expert in the sense that I've buried all of my parents, but also other family members, and I'm really good at planning a funeral and knowing what death rituals or things that need to be doing. Because again, at the end of the day, death and grief are something that we're all going to experience, and to that end, I would also add that we are all going to be. Oh, I just lost my train of thought. Where was it? We're all going to be. No, it's gone. It happened. Sorry.
With death, it really sobers up a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
It really, for people that are anxious, that are just going in their heads, when I talk about it a lot too, because I think about it a lot. I think that's just, it's a big motivator. I know in the past, it's been something that would inhibit my progress in life, but ever since learning about Stoicism and learning that death is a part of life, and I've had some people who weren't that close to me, but it's just kids that I went to school with, and the car crashes and people, the overdoses that I'd hear, and these people I've met, people I've worked with, and while nobody close to me has really died, I hear about it, and I got really scared that it would happen to my family members one day, and I kept asking myself, would I be able to take it? Would I be able to take it? And then I kept telling myself, no, I wouldn't be able to. And then I kind of this really drove my mind crazy for a bit.
Yeah, that would.
Yeah, but then I just accepted it, that it is coming. And instead of using that as a thing that would propel me to fear life, I used that to add meaning.
Oh, yeah.
That, okay, we're all going to die. So I might as well hear people out. I might as well not give in to the short-term gratification of giving into my anger, of treating someone, of resentment, of just putting some other people down. And death is such an important
aspect of life.
Every teacher needs to teach their kids.
Yeah, and like I've loved talking about it now, and it's always interesting to me, just bringing it out there and just talking about it, because so many people have wildly different experiences with death and grief, but I think it's such an important life lesson to learn about in terms of like, okay, well, this is what this means. Because there's a lot of, I think, not necessarily misinformation, but there's a lot of things, that preconceived notions perhaps that people have around the funeral industry, or what rights you have as a mourner, and like all of that stuff. Like, for example, most of this was during COVID, but in my death work, something that I've known is I always wanted to wash my parents' bodies after they passed. It sounds really weird from left field.
I watched an episode on it on this Midnight Gospel.
Oh, really?
I did, and it's just a little. Just talks about those death and all the stuff,
the rituals and stuff.
philosophy. But yeah, go on.
Oh no, I was just gonna say the so when my dad died, I actually was able to ask the funeral home. I was like, I would like to wash my dad's body, and they were a bit taken back. They're like, what? And I was like, like it's an act that a lot of other cultures have done throughout history, but it's an act of love. It's like my dad took care of me when I was a kid and raised me. I want to do this one final act of thanks so that I can do it. And unfortunately, because it was during COVID, they wouldn't allow me to do that.
No.
Then I kind of was like, well, how about I press the button for the cremation, because he did get cremated, and the funeral director must have not liked me, because then she was just like, no, and I was like, but like,
Please.
why?
Yeah.
And it was interesting, and you know what, at the end of the day, it was just more like, okay, I don't want to get butting heads with people who are literally taking care of my dad's body, so I was like, okay, that's whatever. But like, I know, like, I openly talk about like what I want done with my remains once I die, and people find that very odd because I'm only 34, but people people get weirded out about death, but I think, again, it's the great equalizer. It's the thing that we're all going to experience at some point, and there's something important to talk about it, because at the end of the day, we're all going to experience it to some degree, and there's just nothing, like you said, it's nothing more sobering than death. And so that's why one of the reasons why I always love talking about and educating people about death.
Yeah, and it's can happen at any time.
Oh, yeah.
You don't know.
You don't know.
You don't know whether tomorrow, within the next hour.
Oh, hopefully not within the next hour.
Yeah, no,
yes.
hopefully not. But for many people, that is the reality of it. Well, or it comes out as a shock.
Mm-hmm.
And you've sat in the previous deaths of your parents.
Mm-hmm.
You sat in the room.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me how that felt?
So I was there usually right before. So I do believe that people get to have like a choice when they get to pass. So when my stepmom passed, for both my mom, like my stepmom and my mom, it was right after we left is when they passed, and I think it was one of their final acts to like not make us worry. So for example, when my mom died, she had her sisters there next to her, and we had gone home. My sister and I, we were just going back to Sherwood Park, and it was just one of those moments where my aunts told me it was right after we left that they phoned us, and they're like, we just didn't want to tell you on the road. We waited till you got home, but yeah, Mom passed, and it was like, whoa.
Yeah. So when you heard that news, how did that feel?
Well, I think so. With each parent, it's different, but like for my mom, she had early onset Alzheimer's, so it's often called a long goodbye, because the body that was there was not the mom that raised me. It was her physical body, and so we mentally were prepared for that for a long time. Was it still a punch to the gut? Absolutely. It was like one of those moments that you see in the movies where everything just goes silent, and you're just like, not necessarily a high pitched ringing, but you're just like, whoa, that just happened. And yeah, no, it was very somber, and it was very hard. Because at that point, my sister was living elsewhere, and I was living with my dad, and of course my parents were divorced. So it was really weird in terms of like how my dad reacted. And so like my sister came and got me, and we just literally sat in silence afterwards, waited for my aunts to come back, and we ended up staying till like up until 3 or 4 in the morning, just talking and reminiscing,
Processing that.
Yeah, and there's something beautiful about that as well, in the sense that like funerals are for the living, not the dead, because that's our act of outward love, I guess.
Because I don't goodbye.
Yeah. I would say the hardest one out of all my parents, not to like rate them, but like the hardest one was my dad. So I was with him up until so he got diagnosed with cancer, and he got bile duct cancer. So it's a very, very similar to pancreatic, and so that hits real fast. So he was doing a lot of chemo, and then got kind of a clean bill of health, but then it came back with a vengeance. And when it came back with a vengeance, the doctors gave him 30 days. And when a doctor gives you a time frame, they usually try not to do that if they can. But when they gave you a 30-day notice, like it is very accurate. And looking back, I was teaching summer school at the time while all this was going down. On one side, I probably should have just resigned and not taught it, but on the other hand, I was like, I'm glad I did, because at that point I was living downtown and I was commuting in every day, so I was able to get a little bit of an extra long lunch break, and I got to see my dad and say all the things that like you want to be able to say, because he knew his time was coming. But the day that he died, it was interesting because I went with one of my oldest friends, Jordan, who I've known since I was in kindergarten. She's one of my best friends, and we ended up going and randomly getting tattoos that day, and we ended up just having a great night. And then, which is what I think my dad wanted, because my sister was out and about, and then she came back and we kind of traded places because I was there for a few days and needed a break. And then that night, when I woke up at like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was from my phone, and I was like, I missed like 8 calls, and I was like, oh, this is the call. And so yeah, so like I think my dad wanted me to not be there, in the sense that like he wanted me to be free from that. And I have been in rooms where people have died, so not necessarily my parents, but like it is crazy and eerie how peaceful it is. Um, and yeah, so like I think in terms of what the experience was like, it was just, it's very calm in a weird way. It's the best way I can describe it.
I've talked to some people who have had near-death experiences, and these are people in their 70s and 80s, because I work with some people that are, sadly, they have to work at that age,
Yeah.
because they just need to provide.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And this guy had told me he's big into drugs, or
Yeah.
he was back when he was in his 20s, 30s, and he talked about going on all sorts of drugs, and he said that no amount of peace has ever given him, out of all the 70 years that he's lived, dying in that hospital bed. And I'm like, cool. Like I never really looked at it that way. And that just reminded me, from the way you described it, how it's somber, and
it's very somber but peaceful.
yeah, peaceful. And we shouldn't shy away from that,
No.
because it is a part of life, and it's coming for all of us. Yeah, memento mori.
Memento mori. And like, I think there's something to be said about like we in the West, we sanitize our death experiences a lot. Like a lot of people say like, oh, you need to die in hospice, and that's completely false. You can actually die at home if you want to, and that's what my dad chose. He chose to die at home. And yeah, no, it like does it make it harder in some capacity? Absolutely, but at the same time, there's my dad actually always called it end of life decisions, in the sense of like comfort care. He wanted to be comfortable, and so he stayed at home and he got his wishes, which is kind of cool.
That's awesome. That's he lived a full life, and he raised you and your sister.
Yep.
And he's done his job, and
he did.
He's in a better place. I'm very religious, so I'm a firm believer of this is not the end. Like this reality.
I believe in heaven too.
Yeah. So I think, like, you'll have to see him one day, and
absolutely. I know that.
So beautiful. Yeah.
Absolutely.
How do you believe learning about death and grief fosters resilience and mental grit among students?
Yeah, I think we all in life experience tumultuous times, and I think talking about arguably what is the most tumultuous time in people's lives just really exemplifies, and talking about mental grit, it's that ability to bounce back, that perseverance. And we all know that we're all going to lose someone at some point, and you can always go and give up and like just be completely in your grief and let that overcome you, which is a valid experience. If that's what you need to do, it's beautiful. But at the same time, grief and experiencing that is only a piece of time. You will come out of it. Winston Churchill has a quote that says, if you're in hell, keep going, because you're not done. And I think that's very true, in the sense that, you know what, at the end of the day, grief is going to suck. It sucks so much. But at the same time, it allows you to become stronger. I think grief is I'm going to quote WandaVision here, but there's a quote that really resonated with me in that show, is that grief is the price we pay for love. And I think that it hits nail on the head, in the sense that your grief is because it's a breaking of love. You're heartbroken in a way, and there's there's an analogy in psychology called the box and the ball in the box for grief. And the idea there is your grief is like a little box with a button. And as time goes, you start with this giant ball. So it's always going to hit that button for grief. But over time, either the box gets bigger or the ball gets smaller. And over time, it's less likely to hit that button. And so you never really overcome grief, you just learn to live with it. So like I always talk about new normal afterwards, and there's something to be said about that in terms of having gone through it and been on the other side. All those experiences, like if you were to ask me 10 years ago, do you think all your parents are going to be dead by that time?
In what ways can understanding and processing grief contribute to personal growth and emotional intelligence?
I think the first thing is that creating a space in which you can talk about grief automatically allows people to understand that it is something that builds character. And I know in the last question we talked about mental grit, but it allows us to not necessarily overcome it, but it allows us to hurdle that or jump that hurdle a little bit, and that you get to experience it. Um, yeah, like I just death is something that's going to happen to us all, and it's going to be really important that we talk about it. And I think creating that space in which we openly discuss it, we don't sanitize it, we bring in the visceral realities of it, I think that just allows people to grow from it. I mentioned earlier that I would not be who I am now without having experienced all the loss I have. And in some cases it can be for a great thing, but all others, like I would say, like it has definitely colored my humor, and that my humor is a little bit more gallows related humor. It's a little darker. If you ask my friends, there's like I will most likely make a dead parent joke once or twice, and like I say that tongue in cheek, but that's also a way I process it, and I do that double standard in the sense of like I do it for to make more people a little bit more open about talking about death, because then they're more likely to laugh about death. And not that death shouldn't be respected, because it should, but it also, you have to take it kind of on the chin a little bit, in the sense that like you need to laugh about it, because it is, yes, it is a serious thing, but it's also in all the death I've experienced, is that sometimes laughter really is healing. And I was lucky enough that all my parents had a really good sense of humor, so like I think they'd appreciate my dark sense of humor about death. But at the same time, I also think that you talking about death and empathy surrounding death and people going through it, it is a way that people know that they can overcome it and they can normalize it. And I keep on saying that, but like we are all going to experience death. Some of us really early. For example, I was the first one in my friend group to really experience death at such a young age. Now, as I've gotten older, more of my friends, thankfully not all of them, have experienced death in some way, whether it be their grandparents or their parents now, that I'm able to kind of guide them through it. One of my other really good friends, Becky, unfortunately her dad passed away just over a year ago, and when it happened, she immediately contacted me because I was at safe space, because I've gone through it, and I was able to give her and her family pointers. And again, like I mean, we always talk about like what we can do, or like it's always really interesting talking about like age generational differences. And one of my favorite things is that I think in our generation, the millennials and the Gen Zs, that when someone dies in the olden days, like the 70s onwards, they would make casserole and bring food to the families. Now people start kind of like the, oh my gosh, what is it called? Like when you raise money for it, what are they called? What is it called? The what?
GoFundMe.
Yeah, GoFundMe. Mm-hmm. It's just their act of like, it's the modern version of a casserole. Like I always like to do both personally, but that's just because I'm a huge foodie. But I think there's, going back to talking about the food is love made visible, is like, if you, at the very least, people who are dying, bring food. Bring food, raise money, because it's also very expensive to die, but like that's another here or there topic. Nonetheless, though, I think going back to the kind of the root question is, we're all going to experience death at some point, and it's your mental grit and your ability to overcome things and teach empathy is just, it comes naturally just by talking about it.
Yeah, that's pretty much everything that I'm so thankful to have you on today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been an honor.
Yeah, you have to come on again, because
absolutely, absolutely. I would love to
derive great value from this. and I'm sure you've got more to add on and more topics.
Oh, probably.
Finance of it all, and just navigating life and how to become a teacher.
Oh yeah, I can talk about all that stuff. Yeah, I would absolutely love to do that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Justin.
Oh, you're so welcome, Matt. Thank you for having me.
Like,
I know it's weird.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun.
Is there any last words that you would
tell
your students, former students?
Yeah, I'll just say make good choices. I'll leave it there.
But yeah, as always to everyone, there's purpose for you in this chaotic world. Keep going, do not lose hope, and keep it long term. Peace.
That was awesome. Thank you so much.